All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jason Stein, president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another installment of our virtual policy discussion series, Forum Friday. We have so much to discuss today, but first, I'd like to quickly acknowledge our Forum Friday sponsors. Brookfield-based Community Care serves the long-term care and health needs of more than 12,000 older adults and adults with physical or intellectual disabilities across 15 counties. With 24 offices globally, including Madison and Milwaukee, the law firm of Foley and Lardner seeks to understand its clients' priorities, objectives, and challenges to provide them with successful outcomes. WisPolitics is a long-standing Madison-based nonpartisan news service that provides insider information to subscribers and stages events for the public in Madison, Milwaukee, and DC. The service also includes WisBusiness.com, various podcasts, and the statewide Upfront TV show. And thanks as well to the Zilber Family Foundation for its support for today's program. Next, a word of thanks to the forum's strongest financial supporters, our pillars of public policy: A.O. Smith, BMO, Northwestern Mutual, Potawatomi Hotel and Casino, Rockwell Automation, Spectrum, and We Energies. And thank you to our Sentinels of Civil Conduct, JP Morgan Chase, Johnson Controls, and Von Briesen and Roper SC. Finally, the forum's work is supported by hundreds of corporations, nonprofits, local governments, school districts, and individuals throughout Wisconsin. Our members help us provide data-driven, objective research and discussions to inform policymaking in our state. To join the forum, go to our website, wispolicyforum.org, to learn more about membership benefits. And with that, let's begin our program. Before we hear from our guest, forum researcher Tyler Burns will discuss recent research from the forum on Wisconsin's export and import markets and how recent global trade developments may affect them. Tyler, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. To set the stage for our discussion, we're going to dig into the impact of international trade on the state by looking at data on imports and exports. They're vital to the state's economy, impacting consumers, workers, and businesses. In the past decade, they've trended in opposite directions. In 2024, Wisconsin's exported goods were valued at $27.5 billion, equivalent to about 8% of the state's GDP. That was down by approximately $4 billion when adjusted for inflation from its 2012 peak. Exports are important to the state's manufacturing, ag, and food processing industries because they provide additional markets for goods produced in the state. The state's most valuable exports include heavy machinery, medical and scientific instruments, and vehicles. On the import side, Wisconsin residents purchased $38.9 billion of imported goods in 2024, equivalent to about 8.6% of the state's GDP, about $11 billion more than the state exported. We've seen growth in imports of more than 30% since 2016, the result of a number of factors across the economy. Like exports, machinery leads import values. Imports are important to the state's economy as consumers rely on goods from overseas for daily consumption, and businesses import raw materials and specialized machinery for their operations. Next, we look a little more deeply into the state's exports. The Milwaukee area leads the state with nearly $10 billion in exports in 2023. That's a big reason why we're talking to Jackie Carter from the Port of Milwaukee and Dale Koinga from MMAC. Milwaukee is a major exporter of machinery, like mining equipment, and smaller items like motors. The city is still a major exporter, but after adjusting for inflation, the value of its exports are down almost 20% since 2013, a similar trend seen in Midwestern cities like Cleveland and St. Paul. While Milwaukee leads, a number of other communities across the state are also significant exporters, including Racine with $4 billion of export value, $3 billion coming from Madison, $1.5 billion coming from Superior, and as the map shows, a number of other communities across the state shipping close to $1 billion of goods overseas each year. This shows how important export markets are, not just to Southeast Wisconsin, but communities statewide. So, where do these exports go? Canada, as the graph shows, is by far the state's biggest export market. In 2024, they purchased nearly $8 billion worth of Wisconsin goods, nearly double the next highest export markets, the European Union and Mexico. that shows how important this trade relationship is for Wisconsin's economy and speaks to why we have Canadian Consulate General Aaron Annabelle here with us today. Industrial and electrical machinery are the state's leading exports by value, valued at almost $11 billion, or 40% of the state's total. Agricultural goods are also a major export area, and would be in the top three at about $4 billion annually if we combine commodities like corn and milk with processed foods and other agricultural products. Next, let's look at Wisconsin's imports. As mentioned earlier, Wisconsin's imports have been growing and are now well above state exports. We see here the state's top four sources for imports. China, unsurprisingly, leads the way with $6.4 billion, including $1 billion worth of both industrial machinery and electrical appliances. Imports from China have actually fallen dramatically since peaking at about $9 billion in 2022. Canada comes in a close second, again highlighting the importance of that relationship with the state. They're at about $6.2 billion in 2024. We get a wide variety of goods from Canada, led by paper, processed foods, and chemicals. Canada has been a steady trading partner at nearly $6 billion worth of imports each year since at least 2018. Mexico is our third largest source at just under $6 billion and has seen a major jump in value since 2022, largely driven by a sharp increase in automobile imports from the country. Our fourth largest source of imports is Ireland, dominated by chemicals, specifically vaccines. Ireland's pharmaceutical industry has rapidly expanded, with 2024 imports 49 times higher than what was imported from the country in 2014, when it was not even among the state's top 35 trading partners. In addition to finished goods, the state imports raw materials like timber, steel, and other items that don't show up as high on our list when we use dollar values to measure imports, because they're relatively inexpensive when compared to finished goods. But our state's manufacturing industry uses these inputs to create valuable goods, like heavy machinery, and it's this added value that allows manufacturing to create higher paying jobs. So now that we've established the importance of trade in the state, let's look at the rapidly changing tax situation on imported goods, which is what generated today's discussion. Starting in March, the Trump administration has imposed various tariffs on goods from around the world and threatened far higher rates, up to 145% in some cases, on imported goods. In response, some countries have threatened or imposed retaliatory tariffs. While the administration has backed off the highest rates, as we can see in the chart here, the import taxes now in place are the highest in generations, with an average effective rate of about 18%, and that's on goods imported into the United States. This is according to the Budget Lab at Yale. They calculated the effective rate based on where goods are imported from around the world, and they're using taxes that are currently on the books, assuming they continue through the rest of the year. However, there are still potential changes to these rates, including additional rate increases looming August 1st. So we have two things to deal with here. First, we have this high tariff rate, which will impact both consumers and businesses. And again, that's higher than it has been in nearly a century. And second, we have unresolved uncertainty. Are these current rates going to stay in place? Will they go higher? Will trade deals be signed that will affect changes to taxes paid on imported goods and open markets up to Wisconsin businesses? There are a lot of unresolved questions, which leads us to our discussion today on the impact of global trade on Wisconsin's economy, the impact of tariffs on the books, and the impact of that uncertainty for the future. I'll turn it over to Mark Sommerhauser, who will lead discussion on global trade and tariffs and how they impact the state's economy. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Tyler. That was a lot of information that was really, I think, really valuable to kind of set the stage for our discussion. So appreciate that. Again, my name is Foreign Communications Director Mark Sommerhauser. And before we I want to get right into our panelist discussion here, but I do want to just encourage everybody also to check out our report at wispolicyforum.org. You can look at both of the reports that Tyler was just drawing upon. If you go to wispolicyforum.org and you just click on the research tab up at the top of the screen, those should be some of the first reports that will come up for you. Before we plunge into our panel Q&A, a very quick reminder to our audience that we are going to be doing audience Q&A at the very end of this program. And there's no need to actually wait until the end of the program. If you already have a question in mind, you can submit it right now by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we actually encourage you to do that whenever you have a question in mind. Go ahead and put it in the queue. All right, so without further ado, let's turn to our panelists today, who I think are really going to bring a variety of great perspectives to this conversation. Our first guest is Aaron Annable, consul at the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago, which provides services to Canadians living in U.S. states, including Wisconsin, Illinois, and other Midwestern states. So, Aaron, welcome to the conversation, and we're so glad to have you with us today. Our next guest is Jackie Q. Carter, Port Director at Port Milwaukee, which is southeastern Wisconsin's preeminent distribution connection for access to domestic and world markets. The port handles more than 2.3 million tons of freight each year, as well as becoming a growing destination for cruise ships on the Great Lakes. So, Jackie Q. Carter, welcome to our Forum Friday conversation today. And then finally, our third and final guest here will be Dale Kooyenga, President and CEO at the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. MMAC represents 2,000 member businesses, employing over 300,000 people throughout southeastern Wisconsin and beyond. You might also recognize Dale from his past role as a Wisconsin state senator representing the eastern Waukesha County area in the state legislature. So Dale, welcome to Forum Friday.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I just want to make sure all of our guests are joining us here. I see you, Dale. I see Jackie. And Aaron, if you could just turn on your camera and join us. There you are. Okay. Excellent. I think we have everybody on board now. I think it's a lot of ground to cover here. Dale, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here first. President Trump, I think, has come to be seen by some folks as mostly bluffing on these various, threats, suggestions that we might be increasing tariffs on some of our trading partners. The thing is, though, that the data show that it's not just a threat, that there have been significant increases in U.S. tariffs here during his second term. The Budget Lab at Yale found that since President Trump took office, the average effective U.S. tariff rate has soared to 16.6%, up from just 2.5% before he took office. We understand there are a lot of pros and cons here. There are a lot of impacts that are going to vary quite dramatically from one business to another, or one industry sector to another. But on net, how do you assess kind of the impacts of what we've already seen occur in terms of increased tariffs? And what's your sense of how that's affecting Wisconsin's economy?
Well, that is a lot of questions in there, and that's probably a dissertation right there. But let me just unpack some of the things that you said. The first thing you said was, is Trump bluffing? People think Trump's bluffing. Yes and no. He certainly he loves to negotiate, sees himself as a deal maker, and he throws out these ridiculous numbers for sometimes ridiculous reasons. And then through negotiations, they'll walk that back to get something more reasonable. But net is, as you point out, is that more reasonable is not a net position of a free trade. It's actually a step up from the position we were previously that was more free trade like in some, and this is complicated, it's all sorts of different deals in countries, and it's case by case basis. But I will tell you this, and I know this from very reliable sources who've worked with the president on a day-to-day basis. And also, I don't think you need to have sources that work with the president on a day-to-day basis to know this, that just read what he writes and listen to what he says. The president believes in tariffs. He believes tariffs are a positive economic tool, similar to how some Republicans believe in a Laffer curve, similar to how some Democrats believe in university research funding leads to economic growth. He believes that tariffs lead to economic growth. So that's not a bluff. And he's just wrong about that. I mean, it is a large consensus of mainstream economists from both the right and the left, and no right or left, just mainstream, who just say freer trade is better than tariffs. This is the wrong direction. And so it's concerning. Now, the impact in the Milwaukee area is a mixed bag. The majority of businesses express concern. The vast majority express concern. There are some companies that think this is good, and those are the minority, not the majority. But even companies where you would think that, oh, this is good because they're American manufacturing, the economic system is so complicated, and the raw materials and the flow of goods it upsets their cost structure. It upsets their ability to do financial forecast for predictability, because you don't know. I mean, you have to be a psychiatrist that's intimately familiar with Trump's head to know exactly how you are going to forecast the price of copper or aluminum or dolls for that matter. If you're a retail, you go down the list. The other thing I'll point out, and I'll be concise here because it's a panel, not a lecture. Last thing I'll point out is this: is we're hearing from more and more businesses that say we are concerned about backlash from countries that we have relationships with and the tone of the tariffs. Not even the policy itself, but just the tone here. And let me give you two examples. There's an architectural firm in the Milwaukee area, MMAC member, who had a Canadian firm that did, or partner they've been doing work with for 25 years. They called to say, hey, we just hope we're good, everything good. Just want to know that we don't share the messaging on Canada and what you guys mean to us. And the response was, we appreciate that, we know that, but we are shopping around. It is personal, and we're reassessing our relationships. And you see that with tourism numbers between Canada and the U.S. And then also I have large companies that do sales. Let's take Europe, for example, and they're already seeing, whether it be government sales or directly to consumers, a kind of settled boycott saying, you know what, the quality's the same and the price is similar. I think I'm going to support the hometown team on this. I'm not going to support the Americans right now and I'm going to punish their businesses because I'm frustrated. And I find it very personal that our militaries have fought with America in the war on terror, that we've had trade, and it's personal, and consumers and governments are taking that personal, and I get it. There's definitely unfair trade around the world that should be addressed and has to be addressed, but the tone matters, and that's another thing I'm hearing from Milwaukee businesses. The tone matters, and it's concerning. The tone has to change.
Real quick follow-up, Dale. Obviously, we talk about how the impact varies. As we just think very broadly, what are some of the types of businesses here in Wisconsin that are maybe seeing more adverse impacts versus the types that are maybe doing fine or perhaps even benefiting from this new environment?
Yeah, the companies that are fine. I mean, there's one company that sells into China, and for their particularly negotiated product, because of the hard stance, the tariff was significantly reduced. And all of a sudden, they're seeing a competitive nature in sales in China. That was one company in like the appliance area. Another company's in the steel industry, and obviously they're like, hey, and they're right about this. This is why it's not a one size fits all. We're generally against, as an association, these tariffs. Understand there are carve outs. China has completely manipulated the steel market. They've done that to dominate and crush partners like Canada and the US and all our allies. They produce more steel than the rest of the country combined. It's egregious. It's a defense issue. It's a problem. And I could go on about that. Companies that are hurt from it, I mean, most manufacturers, I mean, their inputs, we take low skilled, low margin products from around the world. We bring it here, and then we add high skill and make it high margin, right? And so when you put those inputs in there, those companies are hurting. And companies that have a low cost structure. I mean, it's no secret that there's a company here in Milwaukee that does model railroading, like little plastic buildings and model railroading, and their manufacturing is primarily overseas, China, and they're kind of think of companies like that more as kind of a marketing company, more of a design company, not a manufacturer really. And the low cost allows them to do that hobby and be competitive because of that low cost. So you could do a case by case study, but that's the general consensus. And it's industry by industry as far as it's good or bad. But across the general thing we're seeing is it has a negative impact.
Thank you, Dale. Appreciate all that. I'm going to pivot to Jackie Carter next. Obviously, when we talk about moving the things that we make in Wisconsin to markets elsewhere or bringing the products that we use to make those things, Port Milwaukee is a key link to markets, both domestic and globally, for Southeast Wisconsin businesses. I think it would be helpful just to start if you could give a very quick overview of some of the port's most important operations, some of the types of cargo that it handles, and if you could differentiate just a bit between stuff that's moving domestically versus stuff that's coming in internationally.
Sure, thank you. So the way we kind of explain our business at Port Milwaukee, we've got three sectors. Commercial shipping is our meat and potatoes, bread and butter, however you want to put it. That's our main focus, right? We also have some recreational partners, local folks will be real familiar with. Milwaukee World Festivals, the Summerfest grounds, Discovery World, Harbor House, the Lake Express Ferry. And then we also have our newest arm of business, and that's tourism, where we are supporting Great Lakes cruising. So trying to build on all of those, I think the key thing that we always try to keep in mind is the fact that in order for us to do any of those well, we need partners. We need partners locally, but we also need partners in the national and international spaces. And so how do we continue to develop those relationships given, the current economic environment? In terms of cargo that we move in the main commodities, I'll tell you our top cargoes at Port Milwaukee are going to be salt, Wisconsin winters, obvious, right? A lot of that coming out of Canada, steel, a lot of it coming out of Europe. And then we also have ag. We opened in 2023 a new agricultural maritime export facility operated by the DeLong Company, a Wisconsin company, and they are moving different types of agricultural products. We know that there's a need for that, and we know that that need's been established by the fact that not only has that facility been successful, but in order to produce that facility, to construct it several years ago, we were awarded a Port Infrastructure Development Program grant from the federal government through the Maritime Administration, which is a part of U.S. Department of Transportation. And then to kind of expound on that, because there was so much hope and so much emphasis on that facility, we were awarded a second grant, and they're actually under construction right now to expand that. And what that's going to allow is for them to move multiple commodities, agricultural commodities, at the same time, because they'll have storage capacity to store more than one product. And so when you think about the international space, the ag is what's going out. That's a significant export for us. And then in terms of coming in, the salt and the steel, I would say those are the top three that we really keep an eye on. And if they're shifting in any of those, it's really going to impact our business for the year.
Okay, that's very good, Jackie. I appreciate that. Maybe a good segue to our next topic here will be what share of the products coming in or out of Port Milwaukee are trading with Canada? How big of a role does Canada play?
Canada is a huge trading partner of ours. I will tell you, one of the main commodities we bring out of Canada is salt. Right now, salt out of Canada is down about 59%. So that tells you there's some nervousness, there's some uncertainty. Overall, our tonnage up through the month of May, because that's the last full complete report that we have, we are down probably about 30% overall. And so some of that has to do with what we had, in stock and where we don't have space to replace those cargoes. But a lot of that has to do with a slower start to the year because of all the uncertainty that, the talk around tariffs, the talk around some of the changes through the U.S. Trade Representative's office. So there's a number of things that feed into that. I don't know that we can pinpoint a single one that's really like the leading factor, but I think uncertainty, when you did the report at the beginning, that's a word that I would use. There's been a lot of behavior that has been predicated on the fact that we're just not clear about what's coming and what's next. And so people are trying to react, but they're not quite sure how to do it. It can make it really hard for our partners to make deals because they don't know what the fees are going to be. They don't know when they're going to be enacted. We've had kind of a start and stop to some of the tariffs. There's been we're going to implement them and then there's going to be a pause. And so some of that has made people nervous. So I think if we can kind of get to a place where everything is clear, it's kind of settled. I think we're getting to that point. We're probably not going to like, the space we end up in terms of the rates of some of the tariffs and the different activities around trade. But I think at least if we can get to the point where it's a little bit more predictable, then people will know how to respond.
That makes sense. And that's just some striking numbers you're citing there, especially with the salt cargo. So thank you for that. I want to shift now to Aaron. I think our research, and Tyler did a nice job, I think, highlighting what a pivotal role Canada plays in trade with Wisconsin. I think many folks, especially in the business space, would know that Canada is a big trading partner for Wisconsin. But for me, even not being familiar with what those metrics look like, when I read Tyler's report, I was struck by how big of a role Canada plays with exports. They're totaling $8.5 billion in 2024, as as well as Canada being our second largest source of imports coming into Wisconsin. From Canada's perspective, maybe you just want to talk a bit here about what's at stake here in Wisconsin specifically, as our U.S. leadership contemplates and in some cases implements these really drastic shifts in global trade policies.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to talk about that, and great to be joining you folks today as well. Wisconsin is a very important relationship for Canada, obviously, economic and otherwise. And I think in Tyler's presentation, the word that really stood out to me is stable, right? We have a long-standing, very stable, very reliable trading relationship with the state. As part of our mandate, it includes, outreach to encourage more trade and also to address any challenges that importers or exporters might be experiencing. We want this relationship to grow. And I think the main thing that stands out to me in the numbers is Wisconsin's over $2 billion surplus in its trade with Canada, right? That's what the numbers tell you. We know that that's due to primarily to your very powerful manufacturing sector. And if I look at what I think the U.S. administration is trying to achieve with its trade policy actions, it's, bringing manufacturing back and reducing trade deficits. And in some sense, Wisconsin kind of epitomizes this with Canada, right? With this trade surplus. We benefit from it, in terms of what we import from your manufacturing sector and otherwise, but we also support it with what we export to you in the way of parts, in the way of raw materials, and in the way of other commodities that support your manufacturing sector. So we see it as a win-win. And I think, what's at stake at the end of the day, we've built this integrated relationship with Wisconsin, as we have with most other states, over years. If we go back to the mid-90s when NAFTA entered into force, one of the main sort of trends we've seen over that timeline is we've sort of gone from making things and selling them to each other to making things together, right? Cross-border supply chains have become very important. Wisconsin's supply chains with Canada are very reliable, often long-standing companies who have been doing the business together for years. And that's something that's built up over time. And with the uncertainty around these tariffs and whatever rate they may end up at, some of that may be at risk, including from companies on both sides of the border, not really sure if that relationship can continue, depending, like, if the tariff rate, if it even makes sense to continue that import or export relationship. So at the end of the day, I think, that is what is at stake, along with, we know that it's primarily importers and consumers that will bear the cost of these tariffs. And, there's been a lot of news this week because the numbers are already starting to show that. So it's higher costs, and certainly that's affecting Canadian companies and consumers as well.
Good. Thank you, Aaron. I want to pivot back to Jackie again, just very quickly, because I think you shared some of those numbers in terms of total cargo tonnage here in year to date in 2025, as it related just to Canada, and you mentioned the salt shipments in particular. Do you have a number for overall tonnage going in and out of Port Milwaukee, and is that up or down here so far in 2025?
We're down about 30% overall. Yeah.
Okay. Put that in context for us. Is that comparable to anything that you've seen in any recent years, or I'm sure there is some volatility from year to year.
Sure. When we look at it, when we talk about it being down, we're talking about in comparison to 2024, right? So where we saw in 2024, we did see a little bit of a dip, but we understood what that was. So in 2024, our steel commodity we had quite a bit still in storage. We had a really mild winter, the beginning of 24, and so the salt didn't move as much. And so the fact that we're down even though we were down a little bit in 24 and we were able to kind of pinpoint what the reason for that was, to be down even further from that at this point in 2025, I think that speaks volumes, right? Because we didn't move as much. So I think if I were to go to look back, and I don't have that right in front of me at the moment, but if we were to go back and look at 2025 year to date compared to 2023, I think it would be even more significant, just because we know that we had, more of the salt and the steel moving in those years. And so, again, we continue to monitor it and look for ways that we can kind of alleviate. I think the thing that we all need to understand, no matter if you're in the business or not, at some point these prices will hit all of us. And so we want to be mindful of it. It's either going to be really difficult to get the things that we need, or it's going to be really costly to get the things that we need. So it'll impact us in one way or the other.
Again, excellent metrics, Jackie, and this is really informative. I want to pivot back to Dale now, and we want to talk a little bit about the situation here with Canada, because obviously that's an ongoing process here as the U.S. has been negotiating back and forth with Canada's trade representatives. President Trump here in recent weeks has kind of ratcheted up the rhetoric a little bit and said, has threatened a blanket 35% tariff on Canadian imports in the United States, potentially starting next month. From your perspective at MMAC, what would an escalating trade war with Canada mean for Milwaukee area businesses, manufacturers? Dale, I think you're muted. If you can just unmute.
Sounds good. There's really not much good to come out of it. I mean, I can't see any. Going back to Jackie's example, we don't have salt mines in Wisconsin.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of this is just one way. And not to get to classical liberal economics on this, but the reason you have trade between countries is some countries have natural resources and they have certain talent that other places don't. So you have a trade. There's no loser in that. It's a silly, the whole trade deficit concept is kind of a silly concept, and it's really antiquated for our 21st century economy to balance this out. Now, once again, it's not a one size fits all. I'm in agreement with the president, the MMAC's in agreement with the president, that Canada's digital service tax was clearly targeted to American companies, that was going to raise revenue, and it was outside the framework of the USMCA. And a good thing to come from the negotiations is it looks like Canada is going to pull that back. That's what the prime minister said, and that's what it looks like it will get through Parliament, and that's good news. And that's the point I would have, is that when there is a deal, so when you do have an agreement, and he called it the greatest deal ever in the history of trade, the USMCA that replaced NAFTA, is that when you have a deal, make sure you keep that deal, right? So if we're going through this pain, and it is pain right now with this back and forth with Canada and other partners, is that when you get to an agreement, that agreement has to be an agreement, and you have to hold on to that agreement for the rest of your term. You cannot keep reopening this up. And it's part of the unpredictability of that is so harmful to business. Not only the tariff itself on the cost, but the unpredictable nature of that. And so the hope is from the Milwaukee business community is that, okay, you're going to go through this painful process going back and forth and agreements like that. Once it's done, let's be done with it and know what the playing field is for at least the next 3 years.
Very good. This would be a good one, obviously, to let Aaron weigh in on as well. Again, President Trump talking about a possibility of a blanket 35% tariff. Again, we know that there have been a lot of things threatened, perhaps often as negotiating tactics, but nonetheless, that's something that is out there. How do you look at that from the Canadian perspective? How could that potentially impact trade between Canada and Wisconsin if something like that were to move forward?
Yeah, thanks. And I guess first off, it's probably important to note that negotiations are ongoing as we speak right now. The latest we've seen is sort of this August 1st deadline to come up with some sort of an agreement. if you look back to, most of you are probably aware that we recently elected a new prime minister in Canada. In terms of his mandate for his cabinet, he issued a fairly short list of priorities, and the same priorities for the entire cabinet. And most of them are focused on strengthening Canada's economy and making things more affordable for Canadians. At the very top of that list is securing a new economic and security partnership with the United States. So highest priority for us. And, right now we do, some tariffs are very much in effect, namely steel and aluminum and also autos. Very much feeling the impacts of those, I think, in both countries. We have some countermeasures that are also in effect right now. Some of our countermeasures have been paused, but some are current. And we feel those as well on the Canadian side. And, I think, we've seen this 35% number, that would be dramatic, I think, and I think at the end of the day, we would like to see tariff-free trade. We see the tariffs as unjustified and unwarranted. I certainly can't get ahead of any negotiations that are going on right now. But I would
welcome that, actually, if you want to break any news for our audience here, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. No, I don't. I don't there. But our prime minister did note this week in Canada. He said, "Look, we don't know yet if we'll end up with a tariff-free agreement, right? We've been watching some of these agreements or deals that have been announced with other countries, and it's evident in what you see happening there. But we're certainly working towards getting back to tariff-free trade, and again, as Dale said, so important, restoring stability and restoring certainty, and getting back to working together. And that's really what we're focused on right now. If the tariffs keep increasing, costs will just keep going up. And I think in certain cases, what concerns me is if tariffs get to a level where, it no longer, maybe it doesn't make economic sense anymore to have that import-export relationship. And it's possible on the Canadian side, we have free trade agreements with 51 countries. So you may have an exporter in Canada that says, this relationship across the border is not making economic sense anymore. So I'm going to have to start looking abroad to other markets to diversify just for my bottom line. So that's something that's concerning as well.
And are there specific sectors that are particularly important in the Canada-Wisconsin relationship? Jackie mentioned salt coming in from Canada, so that's one area. But are there other sort of sectors that could be particularly impacted by a 35% tariff?
Yeah, I mean, I think steel and aluminum is very important.
And I have a 50%. There's a 50% U.S. tariff right now on steel and aluminum imports from Canada. Is that right? So this would be in addition to that. Yeah.
Don't forget oil.
Yes. Yeah. And we're a top supplier of steel and aluminum to the United States, and past trade investigations have noted the importance of that in terms of U.S. national security and what we contribute to that. And yes, of course, crude oil, huge relationship. What I would say about that is, there was a 10% energy tariff. What is exempted is anything that's considered USMCA origin, as in North American origin. A lot of the energy imports you actually have to obtain that certification. And in the past, there wasn't really a need to obtain it because we were trading barrier free. So there was a bit of catch up that had to take place. And what I would say is at this point, the majority of Canadian crude oil that is entering the United States, it has obtained that certification and is considered of USMCA origin. So a little catch up had to happen there. But yes, oil is a crucial relationship. And in terms of what that provides in terms of energy security to the United States, generally it's imported at a per barrel price that's less than the West Texas Intermediate price, certainly less than the Brent global price. So it's an affordable source for the United States. It's a reliable source, and nowhere is that more evident than the Midwest.
Okay, very good.
Mark, can I
I
just-
think that's
Can I just
Go-
add on top of it, maybe it's going a little higher level here too, and just talking about the special relationship between Canada and partners like that. And a lot of my viewpoint at the personal level here is viewed by my military service. I've done a lot of work with NATO. I've worked arm in arm with Canadian brothers and sisters in uniform. And in particular, I was in Denmark for a mission several years ago in exchange. And it really made an impression on me. And I think that impression is something that Americans need to hear where we're in a populous state as far as what these relationships mean to us. And for those that are my age or older, we clearly remember 9/11. And it's just as a reminder that 9/11, America was directly attacked. America was directly attacked. But NATO collectively said, no, we were all attacked. And since then, it's been partners like Canada and Denmark and many others who said, we're with you. And they've lost sons and daughters in those fights. And so, as we're talking about some of the more technical aspects of here, I mean, I think there's technical aspects you could, once again, talk about the digital services tax with Canada. Or we talk about some of the protections that Canada has to protect their dairy industry. I mean, you could go through some of these things and actually have legitimate arguments. But while we're having legitimate arguments, the concern I hear from the business community, and I personally have as well, based on my experience, is that when you tell a sovereign nation like Denmark that we're going to take Greenland, like that's personal. And that's going to hurt business. When you tell Canada that's going to be the 51st state, like that's personal and that's going to hurt business. And so that's, as we talk about the kind of more Wisconsin Policy Forum, the technical stuff here, like the overarching thing is for Americans and relationships. And I say this as Aaron was talking, because Aaron and I have a relationship, that relationship's important to us as a chamber and personally, is to really focus on these relationships and remember that at the end of the day, nations rarely trade, right? U.S. government rarely trades with the Canadian government. It is individuals and businesses that are trading. And why are they doing that? Because they like each other most of the time, and they're offering something of value. And when government is putting a tariff on top of that, they are inserting themselves in that relationship and saying, I know you find value in this, but we're going to make it more complicated so you don't find value in it because we have other objectives. And those other objectives, once again, just typically over time in the history of free trade, prove not to work.
Okay. I do want to chime in here real quick and just say that we have a couple questions coming into the Q&A, but we're approaching, I think we're going to do one more question and then pivot to the audience Q&A. But now would be a great time if you're in the audience and you have a question that's percolating in your mind here, go ahead and submit it and get it in the queue. Last panel question here, I think is going to be back to you, Dale. We've been talking a lot, I think rightly so, about recent developments, but I want to ask you one question about kind of the long-term trends and the long view. Our research found, obviously, we all know Milwaukee area is by far the state's largest exporting region, has been for many years. However, as we look at kind of the long-term trend and adjusting for inflation, total exports from the Milwaukee area are down in 2023, almost 20% from a decade earlier. Our research back in April said that this, could potentially be a worrying trend for our state and for Milwaukee. Do you agree, and why or why not? Maybe expand a little bit on that.
No, I don't agree. I just think it's a different economy. And if you look at what's not captured in these numbers is a whole new economy. As I look at that beautiful artwork behind you, Mark, it's a whole nother conversation we'll have when we have different time as far as what's going on there. But when we talk about the trade today, there's so much that's not captured in our trade as far as our service economy, as far as our financial services economy, as far as intangible property. Just look at the complexity of the iPhone, the marketing, the service, the and there's all the engineering. It's so hard to put this in a box. So when you, Mark, point out stats like that, it's much more complicated than that. And quite frankly, the Wall Street Journal, great article of Wall Street Journal today is that #2 city in the nation for recruiting college talent right now. Unbelievable. LinkedIn on Wednesday reported, looking at the data once again, that Milwaukee is one of the fastest growing cities when you look at certain aspects of economy, #5 in the nation. The economy is different.
Eli Lilly, Microsoft, a lot of foreign direct investment. I don't think that's an indication that our stock is decreasing. I think it's an indication that the economy is evolving. We look different, we act different, but ultimately, the Milwaukee region and Wisconsin stock is rising, and our best days are ahead of us.
We are past the 1:15 mark here, so I do want to make sure that we're getting into some audience questions. Again, just to reiterate, if you have a question, you can go to that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and go ahead and submit that. I would say now is the time because we're just going to be going into those now. First question from the audience here that I'm going to take up here, maybe Jackie, maybe you could speak to this one first. This person is wondering, given the rapid increase in tariffs, how have ports in Wisconsin and Milwaukee been able to adapt to these sudden changes in the trade environment and make sure that that these newly imposed duties are being collected accurately and correctly? Do you want to talk a little bit about how that process works? I don't know exactly how closely the port is involved with that, but has there been a difficulty in kind of adjusting to all these sudden changes?
Well, I'll say our because of where we are in the supply chain in the business of trade, we don't always see where the thing kind of falls apart, right? Where the deals falls apart. We hear about it after the fact. We see it in our data. We learn about it when we're getting the reports. I think one of the things as we learned in 2024 when we had the vote, the election ended, we knew that Donald Trump was going to be president. We'd heard about, his talk about tariffs and what he was going to do. So one of the things that we did as a port was we put in an effort to try to highlight a program, a little known federal program, the Foreign Trade Zone program that we are the administrator for. So it's a federal program. We are the grantee for the program. And so we work with companies to see if there's an opportunity to use the benefits of that program to either eliminate, delay, or reduce the duties and the tariffs that are on the commodities that they use. So we've elevated that profile. I'll tell you, in recent years, we may have gotten 2 inquiries in a year for that program. We've already seen about 20 this year. Wow. And about 12 of those have moved beyond inquiring and are now pursuing working with the federal agency to establish a foreign trade zone. And the way that the program works is you basically, as a company, get to establish a part of your property as still being outside of the United States. And so before, what would happen is you keep those commodities in that zone, and then you would, you bring in parts, right? So there's parts of a product that you're going to put together and you're going to manufacture something. Instead of being taxed and having the tariffs applied to the parts, it's only applied to the finished product. And in most cases, that resulted in lower duty rates, right? Well, that benefit of the program is really they're going to eliminate that part of it. So then how does this look? Now it's going to be about folks who have to get parts of their products they're going to manufacture from foreign countries and bring them in, but they're going to re-export the final product. So then they can still, avoid the tariff and the duty, or they can decrease it. So part of the problem that we're having is people have to look at whether or not it's beneficial for them to only use this program for things that they're going to re-export. It's not going to be as beneficial to the products that you're going to bring in the components and then put together a product and sell it in the US. So that's one way we're working with folks. But I think also just monitoring and looking at this and seeing if there's opportunities for us to collaborate. One of the things that I'm really proud about is the fact that the port community does come together. Yeah, we compete for business, but we also collaborate well. And so our associations, the American Great Lakes Ports Association, the Inland Rivers Ports and Terminals, and the American Association of Port Authorities, when we see changes that we believe are detrimental to the industry, immediately there are folks in those associations that are going to Washington, D.C., trying to educate folks. This is one of the reasons that the proposed tariffs in the Section 301 that were proposed by the U.S. Trade Representative, that we're going to add these astronomical fees to vessel visits at ports. One of the reasons that there are changes now that will be beneficial to the Great Lakes ports is because of the advocacy of those different groups. So there's still work to do. Still a lot of things that we need to look at and, see if there can be of assistance to businesses, because that's the whole point of why we exist. We want to assist businesses. We want to make sure that they can get the goods that they need so that the residents and the American people can get the products that they need and want and continue to live the lives that we all desire. So that's part of our goal. We have a small part to play in that, but we think it's a really important one. And so we're working every day to do the best we can to support businesses.
All right. Next question, I'm going to bounce it right back to you here, Jackie, because we had a follow-up question from the audience about the figure that you cited about salt imports coming into the port. Could you say that decline again for 2025? And they were wondering, is that a year over year, like a year to date decrease?
That's year to date through May, actually, through the end of May, a comparison between 2024 and 2025. So
Gotcha.
I think, to some of the things that Aaron and Dale have shared already, as we try to get to the point where we're settled with Canada and we rebuild that relationship and rebuild the trust, I guess, that feels a little bit broken in that relationship. Will we see that go up? Probably, but it's just only time will tell. We will need that salt, so eventually it'll come. It's just when you go to the hardware store to pick it up, is the bag gonna cost a little bit more now? So that's
Right.
really what it's going to come down to for the consumer.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Very good. I want to summarize one of the audience questions, and there's just a few minutes remaining, by the way. So if anybody else in the audience would want to submit a question, now or never, get that into the Q&A button there at the bottom. This next one, I'm gonna throw Aaron's way, and it's a little bit of building off one of the other questions that we have here submitted. I think this person is kind of wondering who are the groups and some of the players that could help to maybe reconcile some of the differences that we're seeing in trade. Obviously, for you, Aaron, I think it would be as it pertains to some of these differences between the U.S. and Canada. We know that there are trade representatives that are sitting down at a table negotiating over some of these things, but who are some of the other groups, whether it's folks in the business community or elsewhere, that can maybe play a role in helping to build some of these bridges and get some of these differences resolved?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the short answer, it's all of the above, right? It's an all of the above approach. We're working with chambers, other industry associations. If I think of like even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who's been a really strong voice on the negative impacts that tariffs have had. But we have a very close working relationship with WMC as well for Wisconsin. And they've had programming focused on tariffs as well. What I also think is important right now is sub-federal relationships. As we at the federal level are continuing this negotiation, we're seeing governors and premiers become more engaged. And as they are concerned about this vital cross-border trade relationship, are getting more engaged, are connecting more with their counterparts across the border. We even see it trickle down to the municipal level. And I can just go back to not long ago in the spring when Milwaukee Mayor Johnson hosted the annual meeting of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, which is a group of cross-border Great Lakes mayors that meets annually and that works together on both economic and environmental issues. And we had a good number of Canadian Great Lakes mayors travel down to Milwaukee for this meeting. It was very encouraging. And one of the main things that came out of that was a joint declaration by mayors from both sides of the border, sort of reaffirming the importance of the cross-border trade relationship and how much benefit it brings to both countries. And basically these mayors saying they are going to do whatever they can to keep that strength and keep that relationship stable and growing.
Hey, I agree with everything Aaron said. And that goes back to what I said about trade between people and businesses, not governments. I want to end on a positive note, so I don't want to end on a negative note, but I want everyone to think about this, and I want everyone to talk to their congressmen or women about this because it's a very important question for our nation. And that is, we're a nation founded on no taxation without representation. And the Constitution is very clear that tariff authority, and because that relates to taxes, resides within the U.S. Congress. And the U.S. Congress has surpassed that constitutional responsibility and has almost completely placed it in the lap of the executive branch. And that's simply not the way the Constitution works and our nation was founded. And so when you look at what was changes made in the 1970s and 1930s, really what's frustrating is the way democracy is supposed to work is individuals and associations, and we lobby our congressmen, the congressmen vote based on the interests of their area in one way or the other. And that's just simply not happening because the congressmen throw their arms up and say, well, we don't have the power, but they should have the power. And that's the way it's supposed to work. And that's one of the things that's so frustrating about this. On other issues, we lobby our congressmen who are duly elected representatives, who the Constitution says they're in charge of things like taxes/tariffs. And somewhere along the way, to be politically convenient and politically isolated from tough decisions, Congress has pushed this on the executive branch. And it shouldn't solely be an executive branch. And it'll be very, very interesting to see what the Supreme Court does on a case-by-case basis on these tariffs if they look at that and say, hey, constitutionally, the sole power for these decisions is not within the executive branch.
Looks like we have time for one more question, Dale, and I'll throw one more back to you, both in your MMAC capacity, but also in your past role as a state legislator. Tariffs are obviously a federal issue, but how do you assess the job that our state and local policymakers have been doing thus far? And what, if any, advice would you have to them of some measures that can be taken at the state and local level? As you mentioned, we're going to see negotiations. We may see announcements maybe in the coming weeks, but we know, who the president's going to be for the next 3.5 years. So what are some things that can be done at the state and local level, in your view, to kind of protect our state's economy and kind of strengthen it in this new environment?
Yeah, well, I don't have any opinions anymore as a former, or for a hat. I am a compensated and employed by a board to have MAC opinions, and that's what I have. So, with that being said, I think that just keep doing what Wisconsin's doing. I mean, I think that this was a great budget that hit all MMAC's priorities, and we had priorities to fund the UW system. That was done to fund K through 12, especially special education. That was done. And that's what Governor Evers brought to the table, and Democrats saying, hey, education is really important to us. And we were elated that over $1.5 billion was invested in education. And on the flip side, we were elated that we also push Republicans and say, Wisconsin's tax burden continues to go down. We just, the last 20 years, it's just not big steps, but every year another step in the direction of a lower tax burden. So we were very pleased to see more tax relief that moves us in that direction. A lot more to do there on education, a lot more to do there on taxes. But that's sort of bipartisan compromise. There's a lot of things also satisfied in the healthcare space that probably will bring down cost. So as you're dealing with federal pressure on tariffs that is going to put pressure on households, anything that we could do in Wisconsin to alleviate pressure on households through tax relief and making sure that we have a good education system, that's what we could do at the state level to do the best we can with the cards that we were handed.
All right. Very good, Dale. I appreciate that. And I think with that, we're coming right up to the 1:30 mark. So we are going to wrap up our audience Q&A today. A special thanks to all three of our panelists. I think we had a fantastic conversation here. And thank you to the three of you for joining us. In these polarized times, I think the Wisconsin Policy Forum, we promote nonpartisanship and informed decision-making. If you're not a member of the forum, we would ask that you please consider joining. You can go to wispolicyforum.org and you can find membership information there. We'd ask that you please also follow the forum on our social media platforms. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So catch us there as well. And with that, it is 1:30, so that concludes our program today. Thank you to everybody who tuned in, and we hope to see you again at our next Forum Friday here in the coming months.